I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and thank you everyone who is joining us here at Awake, Aware, Arise for this very special session. We're very excited about it. I'm going to pass things over to Ram to make the introductions, but want to invite everyone here to please say hello in the chat, let us know where you're from, and any questions that happen to come up during the session, feel free to post those as well. We'd love to address them. Over to you, Ram.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. Thanks. I mean, truly, I don't want to use too many words, but it's an absolute honor to be in the same space as someone like Edgar Schein. That's all I can say. Because from the day that we started working with coaches, even the time when I started coaching, his book, Humble Inquiry, was my go-to book. And along with John Whitmore's Coaching for Performance, these were the, I mean, Humble Inquiry helped me in such tremendous ways I can't even think of expressing how much. And later years, I also found out that I didn't know at that time. Later, when I got involved with National Training Laboratory, NTL, he was one of the leading spirits of that. He had worked with people like Kurt Lewin. And in MIT, that legacy that Kurt Lewin and Edgar set up. Today, there are people like Peter Schein and Otto Scharmer, and it's made that place probably a magnet for people who are interested in learning theories, management development, and so on, far better than any other space that I'm aware of. So it's truly, truly humbling and honoring experience to be in the same space. Peter, his son, and Ed worked together. Peter just told me that he was in Silicon Valley as an executive. Then the last few years, 5 years, he moved together. They both work together now in terms of writing books together. Humble Leadership is one of the books that they have written together, authoring, editing, consulting, and they would talk about some of the other books that Edgar has written. So I'll leave them to you for the next hour. I think it's going to be an extraordinary experience. For me, it's going to be a memorable experience that I'll cherish for a long, long time. Thank you very much, Ed. Thank Peter for both of you joining us. Please, Pete.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks very much for the invitation. And I think maybe, Tracy, I'll go into the slides now and we'll do some talking, and then we'll hopefully have some dialogue after we've been through some slides. Does that work?
Yep.
All right, let me share my screen.
We will keep a watch out on the chat if there is anything that we need to feed you. Yeah.
So that's coming through clear to everybody?
Yep.
And just as a point of context, ocli.org is our little LLC that we formed when we decided that we wanted to work together and do some consulting and write some books together. So
Peter, you might like to just expand that in that slideshow so that the screen is fully occupied with that.
You know what, Ram, I appreciate that, but since we're going to sort of alternate, we decided we wanted to see the order of the slides as we go. So yes, I appreciate the slideshow is a little bigger, but we're going to keep the little cheater bar up there while we're doing this, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah. So so anyway, I just to sort of kick us off, what we wanted to cover today is to provide, in this context of coaching, to provide a kind of integrative perspective that will sort of touch on some of the books that Ed wrote, and then some that we worked on together, and cover these important ideas about relationships and their relationship to coaching, and then also how relationships are so central to leadership. So with that, I'll sort of I'll kick us off and go to one, a simple social premise that Ed can describe.
As long as I've been working as a social psychologist, and that's what I primarily consider myself to be a sort of half sociologist, half anthropologist, but mostly social psychologist. You very soon learn that individual industrial psychology went way, way too far overboard in trying to figure out the characteristics of the great leader, the characteristics of good employees, all this stuff about traits and personality. And a good group is one where you carefully compose the people to be just the right fit. All nonsense, all nonsense. It's really the basic unit of society, and the only way we can make any sense of coaching or leadership or group dynamics, any of it, is if we start with the idea that the relationship is the fundamental unit of society. And whether you are aware of it or not, even when you're passing people on the street, a pure stranger, and maybe you totally ignore each other in the process of trying to avoid eye contact, you are exercising at that moment a particular form of relationship. And then when you go home later and talk to your family and so on, those are all different forms of relationship. So let's start with that premise, that you're always in some kind of relationship. And what does that mean? What it means is that we can somehow anticipate the responses of the other human in the situation. Even with that stranger, I anticipate that he or she is not going to run into me, that we're going to pass each other safely. And that always has two dimensions. There's the task, the getting past each other safely, and there's also the relational. Will we look at each other? If we're in close quarters, will we say, "Excuse me," as we pass each other? And when we get home again, it'll be a whole different set of conversations and so on. But if you say, what is a relationship? Always remember, it's the assumptions you make that you can anticipate some elements of what this other person is going to do. And it becomes then a relationship when that other person also begins to be able to anticipate what you are going to do next. So I think it's something we all know how to do. We are socialized into it from being a little kid when the parents tell us exactly how to relate to strangers and how to relate to relatives and what you can and can't say. All of that is relational socialization and preparation. Now, most of the field talks as if we understand this, and all the books say leadership, for example, or coaching is all about relationships. But even then, they haven't said anything until we consider what is the nature of a relationship in terms of levels. I apologize for the phone in the background. I cannot cut it off because it's part of our alarm system here. And so I will just talk over it in case you're hearing it. So
well,
Peter
Ed, I'll take this one and
about quality of relationship.
Yeah, I think the idea that Ed is touching on that we just want to emphasize is that we tend to talk so sort of loosely about, I have a good relationship with somebody, or I don't have a good, I have a bad relationship with somebody. And I guess our simple point is to double click on that before you make a judgment that I have a good relationship or a bad relationship. Try to define what kind of relationship it really ought to be. because it's, you know, it's not enough to just say it's a good relationship or a bad relationship. Think more deeply about what kind of relationship it really ought to be. And with that, we'll give you a framework in the next slide that Ed will cover on how to think about a very simple framework for how to think about different kinds of relationships, not just whether it's good or whether it's bad.
Okay, so this is a bit of theory that we are taking very, very seriously now. You will find it in almost all of our books and writings. Am I coming through okay, by the way?
Yep.
Yes, okay.
Yep.
What we forget is that society has actually made it easy for us to differentiate what we think of as different levels of relationship, different levels of depth. And so let's talk our way through this. This is crucial to coaching. It's crucial to leadership. It's crucial to management, to ask ourselves, with the various people in our role networks, the people we have to relate to at work, or if it's a coach-client relationship, is it possibly a level -1 domination relationship, which we would see, for example, in coaching when a very, very expert athlete or coach teaches someone else like a new tennis stroke and totally dominates the relationship. Tennis, you're going to do the following things. You're going to swing this way and that way, and you're going to look at the ball. And we hope that that's not typically a work relationship, but I have seen in coaching where the client really, in a sense, wants to be dominated by someone who has all the skills and wants to be taught those skills. In the workplace, this is rare. It's only occasionally in a sweatshop where you have a bad boss who dominates employees. But for our daily purposes, we're dismissing that. Most of society works on this level 1 transactional basis. When we pass each other in the hall and don't bump into each other, we are transacting. When we go shopping and deal with various clerks, we are transacting. When we go to our doctor or our lawyer, we are transacting. When we are coaching with a brand new client who has just been assigned to us because we're an executive coach and we've been told that Mary so-and-so needs some coaching and you're going to meet her next Tuesday, and we now meet in the office, we're in a transactional relationship. So we have to understand that the essence of that transactional relationship is a psychological distance, which we can maintain or we can reduce. And when you think about most work situations, we've, in the last 50 years, built most of our organizations to be transactional. We have job descriptions, we have roles, and we think of the coordination between roles as being something that is written into the rules of how we do things here. And we depend on the psychological distance because then we won't play favorites, we won't hire our relatives. We cover everything in the workplace with roles and rules. And lo and behold, what we've discovered in the last 25 years is that that was a brilliant way to run assembly lines and machine factories, because we needed the precision and the ability to say to people, you must stay in your lane. You must stay on your side of the net. Do your job. We haven't hired you for your whole personality. We've hired you for your hands. And that worked so well that we forgot that there is actually another way of relating. How we relate to our friends, how we relate when we actually think there is some reason why we might want to get to know the other person. So we have defined, and you won't find this so much in the literature, we have defined this level 2 personal relationship. And it's what you have with your friends already. But in the workplace, or in this coach and the brand new client, you have to build it. The boss has to say, I say to him or herself, my new employee who I'm going to meet today, or the coach, my new coachee who I'm going to see today, if this is going to work in today's complicated, fluid, messy world, I'm going to have to get to know that person a little bit better. It won't be enough to stay psychologically distant. I'm going to have to personize, we're using that strange word, not personalize, but personize. I'm going to make an effort to get to know this person at a deeper, more personal level, because I believe that in a good boss-subordinate, boss-direct report relationship, or in a good coach-coachee relationship, it will only work when we become very honest and open with each other. And that openness and honesty will only happen if we collapse the psychological distance that initially will exist when we first meet each other. So the early part of any relationship is a decision. Do I want it to remain transactional and distant, or do I want to get to know this person? And I will say unilaterally, a coaching relationship really only works well if we build that level 2 personal relationship between us. Now, in the workplace, there's even occasionally a place for the deepest level where we become not only personally acquainted, but what we have with our family, with our loved ones. We have a more deeper, intimate relationship that is more open. We can anticipate more things about each other, which is still how we measure the relationship. How much can we anticipate each other? And in places like where the work requires life and death dependence on each other, I think in SEALs teams or in the Rangers or some of these teams that go out and do very, very difficult things, they do reach probably an intimate level of relationship with each other. So the whole point of learning this 4-level taxonomy of relationships is that every day you make hundreds of decisions as you go through your various life events as to whether it's -1 and you're going to get out of it as quickly as possible, or it's transactional, but it's pretty stiff and formal and you're not sure you're getting the truth out of the other person, or are you going for a personal relationship to make your coaching or your management or whatever it is you're doing together work better, because you're now in a close enough relationship, you know each other well enough that you will be open and trusting of each other. That's the essence of this 4-level system, and we believe in it very strongly.
And I'll just add that when we talk about level 2 throughout the rest of the deck, we're really referring to that distinction between transactional or a whole person to whole person connection, with the point being that if you don't have a requisite level of openness and trust, you're not going to be sufficiently sharing information that you need to make the right decisions going forward. With the degree of complexity that we're all facing, we really believe that level 2 being code for openness and trust is absolutely critical as you move forward in a coaching relationship or in a managerial or leadership relationship. So I'll go to the next slide. And so here we come directly to the question for coaching, and that is that fundamental issue that Ed kind of first raised in the 1960s or 70s in his process consultation book, but it builds on this distinction between the answers or the expertise you provide versus the coaching to help and the relationship that you build so that your clients guide you on what they want to know and what they need to know. So in other words, there may be great value in what you know, but it's only valuable if your clients really want to know that. They're not just paying you as a transaction for what you know. They're paying you for your working together on what collectively the two of you or the two groups need to know together.
So moving forward, let's talk a little bit about the essence of what's in the Humble Consulting book, because early on when I first published Process Consultation, I kind of believe that really it's primarily asking questions until you figure out what's really going on and what you need to contribute. But in the title of Humble Consulting, which came out only a few years ago, I realized that the world is speeding up. And a lot of people were complaining to me that this process consultation is all well and good, but it's way too slow. My clients aren't going to sit there and just continue to be asked question after question after question. So I began to rethink this, and I realized that what you ask is actually not just an inquiry, it's also an intervention. Everything you do in the relationship is an intervention to how that relationship will evolve. And so I then began to review my own consulting history and realized that very often the very first question I asked, which was intended to build a relationship, actually often triggered immediately an insight in my client that began to solve the problem. And so I realized that it's not speed that's the issue, it's whether your questions and what you choose to focus on in those questions, if you think of those as interventions and say, I'm going to do something here to build this relationship, but I'm going to base it on my ignorance. The big principle is don't ask stuff that you already think you know the answer to. That's lethal, because then you're already telling your expertise, you're being clever, I already know what's going on. You have to ask questions that makes you inexpert, that makes you ignorant. So someone says to me, I'd like you to recommend a culture survey, or let's be more direct on the coaching. I need a coach. Could you recommend someone from your experience? If I actually recommend someone, I'm being an expert. If I want to be a fast, effective helper, I will say, you want a coach right now? And look perplexed and invite some further statement, you know, or I might be more direct and say, why do you want a coach? Because I truly don't know the answer to that, and it begins to build the relationship. So think of everything you do as an intervention and work primarily from ignorance, because those are the interventions that both will build the relationship. You'll get to know the person better, and very often will prove to be the most powerful intervention you will have made, because the person may say, well, yeah, I do wonder, why did I think I needed a coach right now? And when they're beginning to ask themselves the question that you triggered with this almost automatic inquiry, that will start the problem-solving process for the two of you. So think about how everything you do is an intervention. Now, that leads often in a group setting, by the way, to recognizing your own ignorance, or in the original book I said, I have to access my ignorance and I have to accept it. So this phrase of I'm the consultant and I don't know what to do grew out of being a consultant to a group that had met for many, many sessions, and the next one was coming up. And as I was approaching that group that day, I had a moment of panic, because I realized on that day for that lunch meetings, I had not a clue as what I was going to do on that day when they looked at me and said, well, you're our consultants. What are we going to do today? And so I arrived at that group, and picture yourself as the coach, arriving at a coaching session, and you know that your coachee is going to expect you to open the session. Could you imagine saying, you know, I don't know how to start today's session. I don't know what to do. And consider that might be the most powerful intervention you will have ever made, because you have begun the process of joint problem solving, which will be the key both to getting to know each other and to beginning to share whatever diagnostic or interventional steps may come down the road. Because the essence to me of good coaching or good consulting is that the client and the coach consultant begin to think of it as a we rather than two I people meeting transactionally. It begins a we. So I could follow up with, I don't know what to do, and say actually to this group, what do you think we should be doing today? And that is an okay thing for the expert to do, because I'm the expert on process. I'm not the expert on what we should be doing. And the sooner we recognize that, the better we're going to be at consulting and coaching.
And I want to just add that I have said, and with groups with Ed in the past, in the last few years, that, you know, easy for him to say, because he's been doing this for 50 years. And if you're a young coach or a young consultant, it may be very hard to go into a situation and say, and start a conversation by saying, I really don't know what to do. You're trained, you've taken a lot of training, you believe you really need to go in with that credibility and authority. And we don't want to in any way discount that, but do want to emphasize that if your goal is to get to a helping situation fast, it's better to access that ignorance as quickly as you can. And another way to think of it is the truth is the client knows you don't know, you know you don't know, so accept that and get that out onto the table right away and start that relationship building that'll move you faster to that those shared we insights of what really needs to happen.
I want to add one more point. The thing, well, this next slide leads right into it anyway. I need to tell you what I consider to be the major dilemma of what has come to be a very common coaching situation, namely executive coaching, where in my original writing, I made it a big point to say that it is important that the client pays for it. Therapists have known this all along because that increases motivation and commitment to the problem-solving process. And so I need to talk to you briefly about the dilemma of executive coaching, where the company is paying for the coaching that some member of that company is expected to engage in with someone who may be an inside professional coach, but is often an outsider who's being paid by the company to work with Mary Jones on some issue that the company and Mary have defined. She's been told she needs coaching and she's going to meet her coach. In my consulting book, there's a case of what can happen, where as the coach and the client get to know each other better, the client begins to understand that the coach is not just the company agent brainwashing me, the coach is actually trying to help me. So I'm going to open up to the coach what I really feel, namely that this supervisor who has designated me to be coached is actually the problem in our organization. And you, dear coach, may not realize that. And here, let me give you some data on what's really going on in this organization that actually led this supervisor to asking you to coach me. And now the coach is in a very interesting dilemma. First of all, whether to believe the client, how seriously to take the data, and if indeed the coach begins to believe that it is the supervisor who's the problem, who should not have sent this client to me because the problem is in the supervisor rather than in the client. Now, what do I, the paid coach, paid by this very same supervisor, what do I do with that data? So I spent quite a bit of time with this coach trying to figure that one out. And I think it's one of the great unspoken problems of executive coaching that we haven't really sorted out well enough. If the problem is in the company rather than in the client, do you actually help that client leave the company? And do you find a way to make the company aware that it has a problem that it's been denying? So I had to get my bias in about executive coaching because I do worry about it. I think it is a problem that the company is doing the paying and therefore expects it to be more of a training event rather than a coaching event where the client really has the power to say, you know, I don't need the help, they need the help.
Yeah, the irony is that this is the slide where we talk about worry. You know, the key point on this slide is what's worrying the client. And what Ed is describing is that paradox that often it's what's worrying the corporation or the entity that hired the coach, not what's actually worrying the subject of the coaching. But we do believe that it's important to try to get to that. You know, you kind of have to break through that emotional wall about and get to that point about worrying, because then you really get to the real context of what's going on. Anyway, I'm gonna move us on here, and just sort of say that this is why we try to make the point about you're really trying to help without telling what you know or what expertise you think would apply. And so again, arguing that it's not as much telling what you know that's important and valuable, it's to convey openness and trust from the very outset. Well, I mean, the very outset that you actually can honestly feel an openness and trust with that client. And so, and this is where we want to kind of transition quickly into some of the ideas that come out of the Humble Inquiry book. And as Ed has said, everything you do is an intervention. And so Humble Inquiry, which was a book that came out right before Humble Consulting, tries to sort of build a model for how you can think about the right kinds of questions to ask at the right times. And Ed can talk quickly through what it sort of means to be intentional in the different forms of inquiry that you take. And again, with the caveat that the concern is that you not get too quickly to knowing the answer and then creating resistance in the client. So Ed, do you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah. In all of the books, even way back in process consultation, I started to work on this set of categories of questions. That humble inquiry is truly accessing your ignorance of not knowing something and therefore asking about it. So it's the most fundamental, important type of intervention that we all have to be able to do. But as we get to know each other, we begin to get curious about various things that have already been spoken about. And so a diagnostic question would be when I would say, well, you said you needed a coach in order to reduce your anxieties at work. Give me an example of an anxiety at work. That would be now taking over the conversation and saying, you know, you've given me an area in which to explore. I want to explore it further. Or a confrontational kind of question might be, you say you need want me to recommend a coach. I've experienced you as a very together person. I don't think you need a coach. Or isn't this a very bad time for you to be trying to think about a coach? Where I now not only take over the conversation with a further question, but whether it's a question or not, I insert my idea of what you ought to be doing. And so that really takes over the conversation. And that's often where we get defensiveness, because the client may have already thought of that, or they don't want advice. They don't want to hear the coach's ideas. They want to be led to figure something out. And then this process inquiry is when things aren't going perfectly well with you and the client. You can always stop and say, how are we doing? Let's examine how we're going at this. Is this really helping? Am I asking you the right questions? Is there something different that we ought to be talking about? We can always, when things seem tense or not working, we can always say, let's stop the action, time out, let's figure out what we're doing, and let's see if it's meeting your goals. Is it helpful? And let's reset to see what we could do it differently. So the basic idea is stay in the humble inquiry as long as you can, but as your curiosity or your need to tell overwhelms you, at least be aware that when you diagnose or confront, you are grabbing the mic, you are taking over the conversation. You are no longer letting the client lead to where the client seems to need to want to go in terms of what's really worrying the client. So that's this piece of it.
So I just want to add here that, yeah, just to add here that this is a lot. We're condensing a lot on one slide here. This stuff is detailed in the first edition of Humble Inquiry, but to sort of shamelessly plug the work that we're doing right now, Ed and I are copy editing a new edition of Humble Inquiry that will come out in the early winter that has more in the way of kind of exercises and some double clicks on this, on these different kinds of inquiry. And so I know we're suggesting a lot today, but it's worth exploring this if you found yourself sort of not intentional in the questions that you're asking a client. So the next thing we wanted to do is kind of quickly transition to the other side of things. If you are coaching leaders and leadership teams, we have a little bit of this that we want to now cast onto the role of relationships and leadership. So Ed, if you want to just kind of give us the setting here. Oh, well, okay. I think I'll move us.
I've muted myself again. I had muted myself so that the phone wouldn't interrupt us.
Okay.
And here it goes. I can't believe it. Talk about leadership.
Yeah, I think they're testing the alarm system where Ed is today. So apologies for that. So the first thing we just wanted to baseline with leadership is that we have a definition in our Humble Leadership book it's a kind of a process definition, not a personality or trait-based definition of leaders. And leaders are, or leadership is a process of creating something new and better. It's as simple as that. It's you're living and working and you're seeing something that could be done better, or something new that could be done that's an improvement on the way things are working. And the act of personally and with a group creating initiative to go do something new and better, that's really what we call leadership. That's how we want to define leadership. And our argument has been that the idea of level 2, as we described earlier, based on openness and trust, fuels that leadership process. This idea leads to the also core idea in the Humble Leadership book, is that if you think of leadership as creating something new and better, and it's a group sport or a team sport, it really can happen anywhere in an organization. And we think that you should encourage the leaders that you're coaching to absolutely allow leadership to happen where it happens organically in an organization. We've seen lots of experiments in, sort of, distributing, team-based leadership or holacracy, things like that. Those are all good experiments that seize on this basic idea that you should allow leadership to happen anywhere in an organization. And so with that, I want to sort of now quickly transition to why this is important now. And so that we have some time left for some questions. So Ed, do you want to take this one on?
Yep. I also want to mention the power of teamwork here, because with these interruptions at my end with the phone, the fact that there are two of us and that we can mute or unmute as needed and pass the baton back and forth has been very helpful, because on my end, I've had terrible phone interruptions, which hopefully have been minimal at your end. All of this is by way of saying, we're living in a very different world these days. We are solving problems that are involving units of organizations, whether those are individuals or groups and so on, that are now far more interdependent than was true in the machine age. Organizational boundaries have become very fluid. Organizations are reinventing themselves. Jobs are initially defined with job descriptions, but within maybe months, that job has changed. And it's not accidental that we're talking now about the most important skill of an employee is agility, the ability to learn new stuff. And we have all kinds of needs now to get to know each other better, because if we don't collapse the professional distance, if people stay in their roles, they continue to be independently competitive. And it's that independent competitiveness, rugged individualism, that has led to spinning and lying and withholding information that has created the problems that organizations now face. If we think we need to know what our employees really think and can do, we need to give them the psychological safety to be able to tell us honestly what is going on. And we have to be agile enough to hear them and actually pay attention to what they're telling us. So in this new world that is getting more complex by the day, as certainly the pandemic has shown us over and over again, agility, interdependency, fluid roles, getting to know each other at level 2, and sometimes even moving into level 1, is becoming the normal that we're going to have to aspire to. The day of the transactional organization is obsolete in today's world.
So just as sort of a wrap up, we also think that it's important to recognize that the heroic leader model, just like the well-oiled machine model of an organization, is antiquated. the I alone heroic leader model is antiquated as well. And we hope that we've given you some ideas as you're coaching leaders to think about this new leadership model. And some of it may work in your situation, some of it may not. But we do think that a focus on relationship building, it may sound sort of self-obvious, but do we do it enough in leadership situations to really, it's kind of skipping to that last point, that it's very important in your coaching to get leaders to think about the context of what's going on in the group, in the subunit, in the division that they work in, not just the content of their work. And the reason for that is that we really believe that dealing with complexity is all a matter of effectively exchanging information. And without openness and trust, you don't effectively exchange information, and you don't adequately distribute decision-making. All by way of saying we're entering a world that we believe is based around much more collaborative work and much less transactional, role-based, machine-like work. We like to joke that if it's really just all about transactions between roles, we really might as well just let AIs take our jobs, because AIs can be trained to do that. Humans and organizations provide value and innovation far beyond any transactional or role-based model. So with that, I think we've got about 10 minutes, and we'll, now I'm losing my voice. We'll go to some questions.
Yeah. Peter, Ed, if you're ready, there was a question from Ray earlier on. Let me give you the sequence of questions. He asked, is there evidence that successful teams are more likely to be at level 3, which is emotional connect? And at that time, you were deep into your conversation. So I answered saying, Project Aristotle of Google establishes psychological safety and interdependability as the first 2 requirements of great teams, and we are connected to emotional intelligence. His question then sort of went way over my head. He said, could we go further and say that the LA Lakers were more emotionally connected to each other than the Miami Heat? So over to you.
We love that question because
Peter, would you please restate the question, because I missed some of what Ram said.
Well, Ram brought up, sort of stealing the answer from us very appropriately, that the Google Project Aristotle is one of the best examples we have of demonstrating that psychological safety is probably the most important factor in team success and team cohesiveness. And it sort of builds on that idea that it's actually a little bit beyond level 2, goes into this idea of sort of professional intimacy and a high degree of psychological safety that often is characteristic of teams that are very successful. And Ed mentioned the Navy SEALs, those high performance teams that obviously have a level of connection to each other, finish each other's sentences, that kind of level of connectedness that, interestingly is probably characteristics of generally of very successful startups. Not surprising, the founders are spending 20 hours a day together. They have a level of professional intimacy that's above and beyond level 2. But the reason I love the question is that in the past we've used really successful athletic teams as very good examples where they're so connected with each other and with their coaches that they all start talking about how they love each other. And it's very funny when professional football players, whether it's, NFL football or Premier League football, they talk about how they love each other. And, wait, these are macho pro athletes. What are they doing loving each other? Well, it's a different form of connectedness that reflects the fact that they're spending, so much of their work and lives together that they do develop a bond that's deeper and more resilient and more elastic. That, it's absolutely beyond level 2, and maybe that's the new book we'll have to write, Beyond Level 2.
Well, I want to add to that because I think it is our next area to explore, in the sense that in the coaching relationship, when I'm coaching someone, I'm very aware of when is something too personal to ask about. That boundary is in society reasonably clear. We understand that sexual things and so on are clearly out of bounds. But as we get to know each other, what's in bounds and what's out of bounds gets fuzzier and fuzzier. And I think it's very clear that we limit the actions we take. But the boundaries around what we talk about are getting, I think, fuzzier, and it's precisely between that level 2 and 3 area. When would somebody say, no, I think you're now getting too personal. I don't want to answer that question. When we hit that boundary is less and less clear to me.
And I do think that we're in this everything's on Zoom pandemic phase, we're being forced to think about this stuff in ways that we couldn't have imagined a year ago. I mean, imagine if we were coming to present at a Coacharya conference, the context would be completely different. You wouldn't be visiting, well, you might be actually be visiting Ed in his office, or me with my virtual background because I have a lighting problem in my room. But it's really forcing us to rethink how we're sort of inviting people into our experience and hoping that people will also invite us into theirs, because if we share those things, we really communicate better. And information sharing is what it's all about.
Well, what we've learned from the Zoom lockdown stuff is that we miss the connection emotionally, but for information processing, Zoom actually forces us to be more precise and more accurate. And I can imagine that we might find it easier to talk about very personal stuff on Zoom than when we are face to face.
That's truly, truly very interesting. The shift from the personal to the emotional intimacy becomes easier when we are virtually connected.
Yeah, I think we try to make that point in the Humble Leadership book that, of course, couldn't possibly have anticipated the pandemic, but was aware of the fact that we are interacting this way. But we've tried to kind of make the argument that you still have to have those moments of three-dimensional real life with each other to really build the connectedness that's going to be resilient and elastic down the road. But since we don't have that option in the pandemic world, I think we are kind of figuring out ways that we can create a little bit more of that intimacy. And it's got to benefit us for when we transition to the post-pandemic phase of actually meeting with each other in person again. I really believe that we're going to benefit from this silver lining.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Peter. Thanks a lot, Ed. It's been wonderful having you. Tracy, I'd let you close as a host.
Yes, thank you so much for such a fascinating, insightful session. I cannot wait to watch the recording. So it's been wonderful. For everyone that's joining us, I did put a link in the chat with the LinkedIn group to continue this conversation. So please feel free to do so. And Ed, Peter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thanks very much. Sorry we didn't get to more of the questions, but we've, Ed and I talk a lot, so sorry. Hope you enjoyed it.
It was wonderful listening to you. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.